Hello, folks, and welcome to the real estate market analysis for December 2022 for the city of Gilroy. As we like to do here, we are going to take a look at what the numbers show us in terms of how we performed in the month of December, comparing that to the same month last year. But then we're also going to look back just over the past months to see what sort of trends we can spot, and then hopefully see if we can figure out what we might expect from the first few months of 2023. So let's go ahead and jump in. But before we do, let me just remind everyone, if they'd like to reach out to me, you can find me at soldbyrobert.com. From there, you can get access to all of my tools that I make available to buyers and sellers. If you're a seller or interested in figuring out the current value of your home for whatever reason, I do have a free online tool to get a estimate of the value. Of course, with the changing market right now, those online tools, regardless of who puts them out, are going to be less accurate than usual. So the best way to go would be a competitive market analysis or a comparative market analysis, which is something I can do for you. If you are a buyer, I've got some great search tools out there for you. You can go to my site and get started right now finding properties that'll fit your needs. So feel free to head on over there to check that out, or you can send a message to me from the site. Just click the contact button and you'll be able to send a message directly to me. All right. So let's go ahead and jump in here now and take a look at the total number of active listings that we are seeing in Gilroy right now for December of 2022. And as we are seeing pretty much across the board with just about all of our communities, ranging from Santa Clara County all the way down, we've had a 107% increase in the total active listings in Gilroy. Last year, December 21st, we had 28 homes on the market. This year, December 22, 58 homes currently on the market. And as I always do, I have this chart set up so that on the right-hand side, you have the Decembers for both this year and last year right next to each other, so you can see visually how they stack up to one another. And I've tried to color them appropriately so that you can see the difference there. And then as we look back, just chronologically, we can try to spot the trends. Now, of course, because of the sample size, remember Gilroy is a much smaller area than the entire county, and so that's going to mean that we may see weird variations in some of these charts where there might be a spike one month simply because, given the small number of homes in the market, a single home that has been on the market for, say, 200 days can very much skew what we're looking at. So just keep that in mind as we go, and I'll try to correct for it as we review these numbers so that you're really getting numbers that really reflect more of the reality of what's going on. But as we look at the past performance, we can see we peaked in July, which makes complete sense given the season, where the total number of active listings were 101. And then we had a pretty big drop in the following month, so clearly we had some sales there. And then it jumped up a little bit in September and October, and then we've been in a steady decline since October. That is all normal. There is nothing odd about how each one of these months has sort of related to the month before it and after it as we go into wintertime. You tend to see a drop off in the number of homes on the market in wintertime, as folks don't want to deal with folks coming into their house when they're trying to have vacation plans followed through with in terms of Thanksgiving and Christmas. So typically what we see is a jump in January. Now, last year, we did see a jump in January, but not a huge one. It was from 28 to 36. And I would guess that we will see the same trend in January of 2023 for Gilroy. It'll be interesting to see as it relates how much of a jump we get. Last year's was very mild. What will this year's be? It'll be interesting to see what has happened in terms of the attitudes of sellers. Do they feel like they need to sell now or do they not? And a lot of that's going to depend on how many buyers there are and how hot the market is for sellers, or whether sellers think that the time to sell has passed. Of course, there will always be some segment of the market that has to sell for one reason or another. So it'll be interesting to see what happens in January as we get into that time when the inventory tends to go up. Now, new listings. These are the number of homes that actually decided to go on the market in December of 2022. Relatively little change. In fact, because of the sample size, I would call this change I would call it flat. It's a 4.3% increase from last year. But last year we had 23 listings added to the market, and this year we had 24. So I'd call that basically a wash. Given the small sample size, it's not significant enough to really come to any conclusions other than we had this about the same amount as last year. But if we try to look at the trends, we can see in the typical times, we are peaking where we would expect to. As the summer months are approaching in April, May, we start to see homes getting listed more. In January, we saw January and February, both months had 52 homes added to the market. So that big jump after December. is something I'm expecting to see again in 2023. We'll see how much that affects the overall inventory. But my guess is we'll see a similar trend as we move forward into the first quarter of 2023. For total number of homes sold, big drops. We had a 58% drop in the total number of homes sold in Gilroy in 2022. Last year it was 45 homes sold. This year it was 19 homes sold. And again, not a huge surprise. A little bit of a surprise though, in terms of July and August and September. We're seeing most of the sales having happened in Gilroy in April of 2022, which is interesting. That's a little earlier. We would expect the peak to be a little later than that. But that, I think this shows how in that market, and remember back at this time, in that time frame, was just before interest rates got the big hit. So these sale declines in a typically up period of time, I think simply reflects the fall in demand since money became so expensive to borrow during that time frame. Once that started to settle in, we do start to see a normal trend in terms of total number of homes sold, with a decline in October, November, and December as we get into the winter months. It'll be interesting again to see how we pan out in January. My guess would be we do not approach the same number of homes as last year, but it might be again a wash. Gilroy has been relatively flat, and for reasons we're going to see here in a minute. Gilroy is one of these few markets in the South County and the county overall that have really sort of not embraced, but adapted to the price changes that have happened in the marketplace much quicker than other markets where the disconnect between what sellers expect and what the market will support it's a very wide gap. Here, much less so. So it's interesting to note that in terms of just the general market in Gilroy. And I think also makes Gilroy a very interesting place to be a buyer, because the psychology there isn't, you don't have to overcome this huge perception on the part of sellers that they need to have a huge discount in what their current list price is. The vast majority, the average home in Gilroy seems to already be relatively calibrated to what that new value is. Original list price. Now, this is a way to look into the heads of sellers in Gilroy. And these are folks that listed their homes in the month of December. And this is what the home listed for the day it went on the MLS. If the home had a reduction in price or an increase in price after this does not reflect that number. So this is just a reflection of what sellers decided to try to sell their home for. This year, in December of 2022, the number was down 3.2% from the same time last year. Last year, the average was 1,013,000. This year, the average was 981,000. And that shows an absolute calibration to the new realities of the market. And you can see it's been a pretty significant drop since October. The folks in Gilroy kind of got it. And in November, December, we really saw them, on average, listing homes at a much more reasonable price, given the overall changes we've seen in the real estate market. So it's kind of amazing. Most of the other markets have not adapted this quickly. In fact, in some markets, there's 20, 30% differences between what sellers expect and what the market's actually paying. So Gilroy is far more calibrated than most others. Let's take a look at average sales prices. Now, this is one where it's only down 1%, but again, that difference between list price and sales price is relatively small. It's 1%, and because of the sample size, again, I'd call it a wash. So from my perspective, the Gilroy market in terms of average sales price versus average list price is pretty well calibrated to where it should be. Now, the average sales price in Gilroy in December of 2022 is $1,134,000. Last year, that number was $1,145,000. And of course, as you look at this, you can see some months with dramatic variations, and that comes down to the sample size thing we were talking about before. When you've only got a handful of homes selling, what was it? We had 45 homes last year and only 19 homes sell this year. When you have a very wide spectrum of differently priced homes, one very expensive home can offset these numbers. And that's definitely what we're seeing for November, for instance. The real number for November should probably really be 1.129 if we're trying to average this out to discover trends. But we have seen a little bit of an uptick from October to December in terms of average price. Again, because of how close these are I'm gonna call it basically a wash. Things have adjusted downward, but I think we're flattening at sort of where the market will bear. It'll be interesting to see where things go. We've recently had interest rates improve. They're down to 5 point something as of the recording of this market analysis, down nearly 2 points from the peak. So we'll see how that feeds borrowing. Nationally, the number of folks applying for mortgages increased by 7% as when we first got these numbers down to this level. So we'll see how much that translates into increased business in Gilroy and how much attention buyers are now paying, given that they can get a loan with a more appealing interest rate than they could just a few weeks ago. Next, let's go ahead and talk about percent of list price. Now, this tells us how much above or below buyers are paying for the homes that they're buying. And this is a way to look into the psychology of the buyer. A moment ago, we spent a little time looking at the original list price to try to get some ideas about what sellers were thinking when they actually listed their home. This is an opportunity to get into buyers' heads. Where was their head at the time they made their offer? So this reflects not the percent of original list price, but the percent of the list price at the time the offer was made. So if the price was increased or decreased, whatever that new number was, that's what this is a percentage of. Okay, so, and the reason we do it that way is because this is the number that buyers saw when they looked at the house. They looked at it, they saw an asking price, and they made an offer based on that. And we can see we've had a pretty substantial drop from the same time last year. Last year we had 104.7% as the percent of list price, which translates to, on average, buyers paying 4.7% over asking price. Complete turnaround as we head into December of 2022 with a 2.8% drop below asking price. So on average, buyers are making offers below asking price and sellers are accepting it. Remember, these only reflect accepted offers. So these are deals that were accepted by their sellers. And that tends to translate to a few things that you can extrapolate from that. One, we're not seeing as many multiple offers, or if we are, those multiple offers are all coming in below asking price. And given what we've seen in terms of days on market, which we're going to be looking here in a second, you'll see that this definitely translates into a scenario where we're not really seeing a whole bunch of multiple offers. These are times when sellers have to wait for that offer to arrive that's going to work. And when we take a look at the data relating to homes that reduce their price, we're going to see that Gilroy has proven that responding quickly to the market to do your price reductions is what is going to be the formula for success for sellers to get the maximum dollar value for their home right now. So overall, the delta in change from 104.7 to 97.2 was 7.5% difference. So a 7.5% drop from the same time last year. All right, let's go ahead and take a look at days on market, as I mentioned before. Now, you can see there's no mistaking the trend here. It's absolutely been on a complete jump since March, April, May. And remember, that March, April, May numbers actually represent homes that had an offer made on them probably the month before, because this tells us the data, the days on market would have been calculated from when it went into sale. So these are close of escrows. And then we see a jump in June of 2022 that I think reflects that change in financing, right? The change in interest rates is playing out. And we see a very dramatic jump to the point where we are now over 30 days as of August and have stayed over 30 since then. Now that represents a 186% increase from the same time last year. So in December of 2022, we're seeing 40 days on average to get a home sold, and that's up from 14 days last year. So what can we conclude from this? There's a few things that I've mentioned on some of my other market analysis, and one is the psychology part of it, where in my book, once a seller gets to 30 days, I think a switch gets flipped. And if they were very dedicated to their asking price and unwilling to move from their asking price, that 30-day mark, I think, is a shocker to realize that we need to change strategies. Now, for all my sellers out there and all my agents who listen to my videos, what really needs to happen is these conversations about changing your list price to get the best possible outcome needs to happen way before you hit 30 days. My personal policy is it should be talked about, and particularly in a market like this now, where putting in the extra work to get the goals achieved, you need to talk about this weekly, or at the very least every other week, and review how much attention is the property getting, how many people have clicked on it in Zillow, for instance, and how many people have saved it versus just looked at it? How many calls have you gotten? How many appointments have you gotten to view the property? So, and you know, those of us who've been in the market forever, I mean, for me, I have 30 years worth of experience to pull from. You know, when I see a property not performing within a certain band of number of views and number of visits and number of calls for inquiries, if I don't reach a certain point and I'm not hitting that, I know something is happening that I need to address. And the faster we can get these transactions going for sellers, the better sellers are going to do, because as it is now, we are chasing sales prices down. So get ahead of it. Don't embrace that silly saying that everyone uses, well, you can always reduce your price. Well, yeah, you can. But in this particular scenario, every day you wait until you do reduce your price costs you money. So today you could have reduced it by $50,000 and got it sold. Next week you may have to reduce it by $55,000, and the week after that by $60,000. So you need to pick the right number today, right now, and get it sold. Because if you decide to do this a month from now, you need to reduce it even more than you would have if you did it today. Does that make sense? Absolutely needs to happen. So if you are a seller and you haven't had this conversation with your agent and the home's been on the market for more than a week, start asking questions. How much attention are we getting? Is the attention we're getting on par with what you would expect relating to the market and what the market's currently doing? All right, let's go ahead and talk price reductions. And I've got a lot more detailed information because I think this is a critical one. In addition to days on market and understanding that if you're not getting the attention you need to adjust your price. One other thing is the marketplace adjusting its asking price or its list price. Now, we have seen that homes getting added to the market are tending to not be out of whack, unlike communities like Morgan Hill and San Jose, where they're more disconnected in terms of expectations, sellers expecting way more for their properties since from the same period last year. Gilroy has been relatively good about this, and those homes that have stayed on the market have tended to get their reductions. It was 36.2% of properties had a price reduction last month in November. In December, it was 34.2%. And because the Gilroy market does not need to calibrate as much as others do, my guess is this number will decline as we move further into 2023, because we're not seeing crazy mispricing happening in terms of a lot of the listings in Gilroy right now. Now, let's go ahead and take a minute and dive a little deeper into this. The average price reduction in December for Gilroy was $101,000. So $101,000 price reduction on average. The median was $87,500, which tells us that the weight of these reductions was probably at the higher end. And when we take a look at what we have, we can see that does tend to be the case. The ones with the highest price had the highest reductions, but not all of them, right? So we had the highest reduction again. It was let me see. The highest reduction we had was $325,000. And that was for a home not priced outrageously. It was in the 1.5 million range, and it was dropped $325,000. And at this point, it has been on the market for 97 days, and it still hasn't sold as of the compiling of this data, which is only about 2 or 3 days old. So that's crazy. And again, a conversation that should have been had relating to and I actually know that street. I've actually sold a house on that street, so I'm familiar with the area. It's a great area. All right, but the other flip side of this is the lowest price reduction was $8,000, and the total number of homes that had price reductions in December was 14. So as we look at these, and we'll go ahead and take a look at the overall list price here. And I realize you can't see these. I don't want to upset anybody by providing identifiers to a specific home. But what's really good news here is that an awful lot of these have sold since they did their price reduction. And another interesting thing is many of these price reductions are reductions that are happening below the average price. Now, we saw our average price in Gilroy for sales was $1,134,000. If we look at these, for all the ones below 1 million, over about half of these are below $1 million or below that price. The lowest priced one on here was $849,000, and it was dropped by $60,000, almost $61,000 to $789,000. That unfortunately is still on the market, but I would imagine that's going to do well for that particular property. But we have one here that it was $879,000 that was dropped and then sold very quickly. And here's a good example. This is exactly what I'm hoping people will do. This home that we're talking about right now that did reduce its price, did it within the first 11 days. So on day 11, this home went off the market. It sold. So it's currently in escrow. It's going to close soon. It's going to close here at the end of January. But they dropped it from $879 to $847. And I'll bet once they got below that $850 mark, suddenly it was achievable for more buyers. And if this agent is doing what I'm hoping they're doing, they understand the theory of price banding in different markets and determining where activities are. And they're having good conversations with lenders and figuring out where the sweet spots are for borrowers. And that's what happened for these folks. And that is great for them. That is a win for the seller in this case, because now they're not waiting and being forced to potentially reduce their price yet again to get their property sold. And it ended up selling. It didn't end up selling for asking price. It ended up selling for $10,000 below list price. So overall, it was a drop of $42,000, $42,800 from the original, not from the original, but from the list price at the time it was sold. But still a good outcome. Next was a home just over $1 million that was dropped to below $1 million. And I think that was very smart. And it ended up selling for more than list price at the time that it sold, which is a rarity. And they did a drop of $139,000 to get to that aggressive price where they got themselves just below $900,000. Again, smart price banding on that, and got themselves sold after 28 days. This is probably a conversation they had at the 2-week mark. And then about a week or so later, the home probably sold as a result of that. Another one below $1 million with an $8,000 price reduction. This one was really kind of in the same band, but it ended up selling for $30,000 below what it was reduced to. So it was a total reduction, was about $38,000, but that was 70 days before it actually ended up selling. So all good things. And the only other one I would put in here is one of the more higher priced homes, had a $150,000 price reduction. It had been on the market for 25 days before it sold, but it ended up selling for over asking price. And here's what's interesting, and this is a thing that happens. They reduced the price, and then it ended up selling for, what is it? So they had a price reduction to that, and then it went down to that. So almost $250,000 off of the original list price. But even though we had a huge gap between what it ended up selling for and what it was reduced to, it now fell into a price range where more people saw it and got it sold. So that's great news, I think, for these folks, particularly at this price range where things are much softer than other price ranges that we're dealing with here in Gilroy and other communities. So something else that worked great. Glad to see that they did that so that they could get themselves sold. The average days on market on this list for just the homes that have reduced their price in December of 2022, the average days on market is 74. The median, or half the homes were above and half the homes were below, was 73. So when you see the average and the median that close to each other, it's a well-distributed average, so that's good. The max number of days is 139. The minimum was 11 on this list, and we actually talked about that one because that resulted in a sale. And the one at 139 days still has not sold, but my guess is that it will, simply because I think it's now priced probably reasonable for the market that it's currently in. So the bigger conversation to have is there is no way that the average number should be getting up to 74. As I said, if you're approaching 30, the conversation should have already happened 3 or 4 times. This needs to be something you deal with immediately because, again, I know I've already said this and I apologize for being repetitive, but every single day you're waiting, every single day you're not getting sold, it's costing you money. So you need to be vigilant about this one and be aggressive, not be super casual, because that strategy won't work. That strategy worked a year ago, but it won't work now. Waiting doesn't make you money anymore. Waiting costs you money. So make sure you're acting quickly, not just to protect your own interest, but to protect your own pocketbook. All right. I think that pretty much covers it, folks. As always, the goal is to leave you with far more knowledge on the table than we've taken up in your time. I absolutely hope we've achieved that today. Again, if you'd like to reach out to me, head on over to soldbyrobert.com. Thank you for listening, and I will talk to you all next time.